Tears of the Kingdom, you know exactly what it is. So I was letting this one cook for a little while because I wanted to get the true ending and just quite frankly spend some time with it. I also wanted to get some real thoughts and not get blasted off in the hype cannon claiming this is the most perfect game to ever exist. Now don't get me wrong, I do think this game is amazing with a lot of outstanding design choices and elements, but perfect to me just doesn't mean flawless. It means it can't be improved upon, and you'll see in my improvement section that personally, I feel there's a lot of areas this game has to grow. Also, speaking of perfect, some of my footage did get a little scuffed because it was pulled from my stream, but I'll do my best to correct it and fill in where needed. So the first thing I'm going to want to cover is how this game looks, sounds, and feels. Then I'm going to go over the story with some of my thoughts, and then I'm going to go through my dislikes and areas I think that could have been improved upon.
What is that?
I'm going to round this out on some positivity by saying the things I liked about this game and give my final thoughts.
Spank that booty, spank that booty.
This is also going to contain spoilers. So when it comes to visuals, there's an elephant in the room with the Switch, and the fact is that it's a very outdated machine, much like me.
Perfect and glorious.
The Switch was a bit subpar when it launched in 2017, and now is pretty fairly outdated. That said, they do a good job using art styles to make things really work and make things look really beautiful and great at times. Most areas are themed fairly well, and thankfully the dungeons actually have proper themes this time.
Fire temple.
Seems like Nintendo actually heard our cries. The shrines, however, while given a new, better aesthetic, they are all themed the same once again, which is a little bit disappointing. The big new area of the map, called the Depths, which spans the size of the entire map, while fascinating at first with its underwater, alien-esque landscape, looks really cool and interesting, but this place gets old really fast. I'm gonna cover the Depths more in my dislike section. And graphically, things can fall a little flat sometimes, with textures, plants, and surfaces being somewhat low quality.
Look at the graphic fidelity. Look at it.
Like the pickle farms they have in the Depths.
Pickles. I got a pickle farm down here.
Drop distance can also be visible at times, but the game does seamlessly transition from sky, land, and depths, which is pretty incredible, although I am sure there's probably some hidden loading screens when launching up and doing a deep dive into the depths, but they're not really felt at all. Frame drops also do happen when a lot of elements start happening on the screen at once, which can be annoying, but it's not game breaking, but I do have a somewhat high tolerance for these types of issues. It can be a little hard to judge games on the Switch because of its limitations, but for what it's working with, it's doing really well. As for sound, well, Tears does feel somewhat light on the music when you're running around, but not nearly as bad as Breath of the Wild was. That said, they do an amazing job at using music in impactful and meaningful moments. One of my favorite things from Breath of the Wild was the mechanic where when you go through a dungeon and start solving pieces, more and more pieces of the music start coming in, doing this dramatic build up to the boss. And that's here again, and I just really like that feature. Also, the theme of fusion is not only part of the gameplay design, but also seems to be part of the music philosophy as well. You will find various recognizable themes mixed into other songs throughout the entire game, and there's also this thing that I'm just going to call the Chinese dragon melody, which is thrown into a lot of pieces as well, but more on that dragon theme later. Now there is something that I think was really well done creatively. There are these claps that you hear throughout the main theme of Tears of the Kingdoms, and a little over halfway you hear a really big one. Now this seems like nothing major at first, but this is actually a big moment during the game, and once you know about these scenes, it's a nice little Easter egg in the main theme, which I think is pretty cool. Now while this game does have some good pieces and key moments, I do feel like when you're doing side quests and exploring, it can feel a little music devoid, and doing side stuff it feels honestly how you're going to be spending most of your time during this game. I do have a solution for this, and I'm going to go over that in my improvements section. So let's dive into the feel of the game. This game feels and plays very similar to Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild was made to give you this grand feeling of exploration, and this game still has that a little bit, but it's way more focused on traversal and how you can manipulate the environment and elements in unique ways. Combat, movement, and non-vehicle traversal all feel exactly the same as they were in Breath of the Wild though, for better or for worse. They essentially just took away all your powers and abilities from Breath of the Wild and threw you into Tears. And strangely enough, for some reason, I feel like the controls and menus just don't feel intuitive at all at first. Sure, you get used to them after a while, but I found myself early on just not doing what I needed, and the menus and UIs just left me head scratching at times. Navigating your materials inventory and recipes can just quite frankly be annoying. I really wish they also had a favorite section in the inventory, so you could quickly access items you selected to be your favorites as an additional filter. And the fact that you open your power menu at the left side of the controller, but have to use the joystick on the right, just seems a little weird to me. Most of the big changes in combat and traversal actually come from the use of fused weapons, as well as crafting unique vehicles. Because of this, I feel like your horse is now basically useless in this game. It's kind of helpful at first when your battery levels are super low, but I feel like it never comes to you when you whistle for it. This also makes the whistle button feel like a complete waste of space. Sure, you can use it to bring your sage squad over to you, but I would rather just have when you hit it, it opens up a radial menu where you can pick sages or your horse if needed. Also, when you're using all your sages, sometimes the fight can get a little crowded, and trying to find the right power to use can just be a little frustrating at times. And also, I feel like the defusion and fusion mechanics are a little clunky. To fuse a weapon takes multiple steps. You have to select an item from your inventory, drop it, make sure it doesn't roll away, then find the weapon you want in your inventory, either dropping that or equipping it, then change your power to fuse, make sure you click on the right things, and then it just feels a little overall cumbersome. The vehicles can also feel very finicky at times, which, like the rest of the controls, you get used to, but that shouldn't be the case.
A little hard to steer.
Now, as the story goes, I actually really enjoyed this story. It has its peaks and valleys, and it is pretty standard Zelda fare, but overall, I think it's a really good story. Just like Skyward Sword and Breath of the Wild, this has a lot more thematic and dramatic elements to it.
Secret stones capable of amplifying the abilities of those who
So in my predictions video, I thought that this would deal thematically with a Ragnarok-like prophecy and the symbol of the Ouroboros showing the future and past coming together. And while I was off about the Ragnarok prophecy, I was pretty on point with the Ouroboros symbolism. So the game starts out after the events of Breath of the Wild. You and Zelda are exploring some ancient runes and stumble across a being, Ganondorf, who is sealed away and held in place by a hand. Ganondorf's seal ends up being broken because people can't not touch things. This causes Ganondorf to awaken, which he has full knowledge of who Zelda and Link are.
How do you know our names?
Because I saw your Instagram posts. Huzzah! I'm subscribed to your OnlyFans.
Link defends with a Master Sword, causing it to become broken, and then Ganondorf additionally corrupts Link's arm, and then Zelda ends up getting thrown into the past. The sage Rauru, who I'll cover more on later, ends up saving Link and gives him his arm. As that said, Link is still corrupted, so you need to go to the shrines to help purify yourself. From here, you start on a floating island where the Temple of Time is located with your broken Master Sword, and Rauru starts giving you the rundown and the background of things. And at the end of this island, Link ends up using the Temple of Time to send the Master Sword back into the past, so that way Zelda can repair it somehow. Now, I did think the tutorial island was a little bit longer than it needed to be, but the setup was pretty interesting. And I know it's a little contradictory, but I think the basic combat training should have all been on this island. It's kind of silly finding basic combat shrines about halfway through the game. After this main section though, the story does kind of take a little bit of a lull, but it does eventually start picking up again. From here you start to travel around as Link, going to each region trying to find the sages, only to find that each of these tribes has their own issues of blighting their homes. Classic. And honestly, I didn't really find any of these blights terribly interesting. The Rito village is cold, again. Zoras have dirty water, again. Gorons, like the Midwest, have a meth crisis going on. And the Gerudos, while probably the most interesting, you find out are actually just dealing with a bug problem.
I'm sure this is going to be way easier than it's been letting on.
The idea of the Gerudos facing an undead army apocalypse is just way more interesting than finding out they needed to call the Exterminator.
Let's go.
You eventually discover there is an additional 5th sage, Minoru, though, but she's located in the depths, and while you get some cool amazing powers from the depths overall kind of sucks, and I'll elaborate more on that later. So what makes these sages special is they all possess sacred stones, and these are used to enhance their abilities, and they're passed down from their ancestors.
I am the Sage of Water. Behold, this
Just
is
learns
my
how to
new
use his
power.
power right
These sages actually end up becoming your companions who team up with you in-game once you save them, and I thought that was a pretty cool feature and an improvement on this game. Most of the more interesting main story cutscenes actually come from the dragon tears you find scattered across the land. Now, these are optional, but are required for the true ending, which of course I wanted. These Dragon Tier cutscenes show Raru's character development and what Zelda is doing in the past and how Ganondorf rose and stole his power. I was a little miffed they did this memory route again, which I feel like could have been handled in a different way, which I'll go over later on, but overall these memory cutscenes are pretty cool. During these you find out Rauru and Sonia are actually the original kings and queen of Hyrule and that they're Zelda's ancestors. Rauru was actually pretty powerful and Ganondorf's original foe. Ganondorf ends up actually trying to attack Rauru a couple times early on, but Rauru goes full Tien Shinhan on him.
The secret stone of the Zonai. How interesting.
Ganondorf, being no slouch though, plots to kill Raru's wife Sonia and steal her sacred stone, which he does, and that allows him to become the infamous Demon King Ganondorf we know, and thus making him more powerful than Rauru and the other sages. Zelda does reveal to Rauru that Ganondorf is alive in the future, and this is why she's here in the first place, and despite their best efforts from Rauru and the sages in this time, they won't be able to defeat him and ultimately can only seal him away. They need to take steps to make sure Link can defeat them in the future. You do see glimpses of this battle from the sage's perspective once you complete each dungeon with Link, but they more or less say the same things, and the more interesting cutscenes again only come from the Dragon Tears. Eventually through the Dragon Tears, you find the scene where Ganondorf is at the start of the game and where he faced off against Rauru and all of the sages. Now, ever since I saw Link's hand in the marketing, I was kind of expecting a certain attack to come from him. That said, Link doesn't do the attack I'm thinking of, and instead it's Rauru who pulls out the Weeb classic from days of yore.
You're wrong. Years from now, someone will appear with the sword that seals the darkness. A swordsman with the power to defeat you, Link. Remember this name.
Link. Interesting. I look forward to meeting you.
After Ganondorf is sealed away, following the 7 articles of Gundam Fight International Regulations, after this conflict, Zelda starts to work with the other sages to try to ensure Link's victory in the future, all of them going on their separate ways to start the work.
Goron Sage and the Goron people will fight alongside your swordsmen.
She's making these people make generational promises.
And Zelda? Well, she's left with the task of repairing the Master Sword, which I really enjoyed how this was done. The Master Sword can only be returned to its full strength through sacred magic, but the sword can only be as strong as the magic put into it. While the Deku Tree was able to recover the sword in Breath of the Wild, the Deku Tree isn't exactly the most powerful being, and this is why Ganondorf was able to shatter the sword. That said, Zelda wants to use her sage powers in order to revive the blade, but she fears that this isn't going to be enough. Now you find out that sages can actually consume their sacred stones and turn themselves into sacred dragons, but as the 5th sage Minoru warns us, this is forbidden and comes at a great price. But once the stone is consumed, you not only lose your body, but you also lose your mind as well as your memories. Zelda consumes her sacred stone, making the ultimate sacrifice for Link. Zelda, in her newly acquired dragon form, becomes the new resting place for the Master Sword, which will feed off of her divine sacred power until the day Link is able to come and retrieve the sword. You then find out the dragon tears that Link finds throughout his journey, giving him these flashback cutscenes, are actually Zelda's memories that she cried out when she became the immortal dragon. These memories then rain down on the land below, where she now wanders the skies as the great sacred dragon. I thought these elements were a pretty cool development for Zelda's character, and showed the ultimate commitment and belief that she has in Link. It also lets you know that crazy dragon you've seen flying around is actually Zelda with the Master Sword, and she's waiting for you to come after waiting all these ages just for you to retrieve the sacred blade that is now pulsating with her sacred power. Once you retrieve the sword from the feral dragon Zelda, you go off to face Ganondorf with your sage companions. Now you do fight Ganondorf earlier on in the game, but he escapes because essentially he's too dehydrated and isn't ready to fight yet. Once you reach the final encounter with Ganondorf, however, he literally sends an army of soldiers at you, and the sages come to your aid, which is a classic trope, but I thought it was pretty hype leading up to the final battle. Ganondorf eventually summons the old bosses back as well, so the sages have to stay behind and defeat them while you pursue Ganondorf. Now, one of my favorite things in the Wind Waker was how you actually get to have a sword fight with Ganondorf in human form, and this game does the same thing, only much better. This Ronin Ganondorf uses swords, spears, bows, and clubs during this one-on-one fight, and while the gloom aspect sucks, no, seriously, the gloom sucks, you better be prepared for this. I thought the fight was super cool. Now, one thing I was worried about is that all the fights with Ganondorf throughout the Zelda games usually kind of play out in the same way. You beat him in his human form, he gets corrupted with power and madness, and turns into Beast Ganon. And you will usually use the light arrow charged up by Zelda to defeat him in some way. The thing I was worried about though, in Breath of the Wild you already fought Calamity Ganon, and I was worried they were going to retread on this idea again, and surprisingly, they did not do this. Ganondorf ends up doing the exact same thing Zelda does, and ends up consuming the sacred stone that he stole from Summoners. This time, however, he does not turn into Beast Ganon, instead he turns into the Demon Dragon, which I thought was a nice change of pace. And what makes this even better is that Zelda Dragon sees this new Demon Dragon, and well kids, we got a good old-fashioned kaiju fight on our hands now.
Let him swallow me. I'll cut him from the inside.
Let them fight.
I'm going to cover this fight in more detail in the Things I Love section, but for now just know this fight's pretty awesome, and this is maybe what they spent 6 years developing. Once you defeat the Demon Dragon and shatter his sacred stone, which causes him to blow up in a pretty unnecessarily large explosion.
Okay. Was Hiroshima necessary?
Link's arm is then purified, with Rauru and Sonia's spirits awakening, and they channel their power through Link, and the three of you are able to return Zelda back to her normal way, as well as healing Link's arm. This then leads up to the dramatic scene which the clap from the main theme comes from.
I'll use Zelda to press it.
You then get this touching little scene when Zelda wakes up from her dragon slumber and is in shock and joy of how Link was actually able to complete this task.
Oh, Link, you really did it!
Now for the true ending, it gives you an additional cutscene where all the sages meet at the Temple of Time. The sages then all make an oath to protect Zelda and support Link throughout any of their causes, and Minoru gives her final farewell and fades away, similar to Final Fantasy X when Tidus faded away. Zelda in turn makes her oath to everyone that she will always do what she can to protect Hyrule for now and for all of time. I don't know if the true ending was really worth it for the cutscene, but overall, I don't know if the true ending was really worth it, because it just kind of confirms stuff we already figured out, but the added value from the extra cutscenes as you go on through the Tears is actually well worth it, I feel.
I will dedicate myself to that goal.
Overall, I feel the start of the story was really good, and the middle can kind of slog and kind of lose you a little bit, but it's mostly because you have so much to do, but by the end game it really starts ramping up again and ends up being really good in my opinion. Now that I've broken all those things down, I'd like to talk about things I personally would want to improve or elevate. So how about you hit that subscribe button before the hate parade starts. Now that you're subbed, get your pitchforks and tomatoes out, because here comes the things I dislike and think that could have been improved.
Oh, what?
For starters, I think the menus and UIs could use some vast quality of life improvements. Having favorite items on a list where only your favorites would appear would be a start. Yes, they have the most used section, which helps you out a lot, but if you want a specific element that you don't regularly use, there's going to be a lot of scrolling. Same with the recipes, as it only shows them in a horizontal menu, and I wish it was more like a cookbook showing multiple recipes at a time on a page, and allowing you to further filter by enhancements. I also wish there was a bulk cook, so if you had a recipe and you had enough ingredients to make 5 or so, you could just make all 5 in one bulk cook. Also, the weapon degradation is back, and it's just an anti-fun mechanic in my opinion.
well, the Master Sword's done.
Sure, fusion helps a lot with this, but I feel like fusion could have overall been handled much better. It's also very strange to me that you can defuse your weapons in the menus, but you can't fuse. I feel like you should be able to just select the weapon you want, and then it takes you to the materials menu, and you can see your weapon on the side showing the different stats that are available depending on which items you attach when you scroll over to them, and then you can just fuse right then and there instead of fiddling around with drops and powers. The Powers radial should also let you use either joystick to select the option. I would regularly open the Powers menu, which uses a button on the left side of the controller to open the menu. I would then try to use the stick on the left controller to move to the power I wanted, which intuitively feels right, but that won't work because you have to use the right joystick. The thing that makes this also more silly is you get the ability to auto-build later on in the game, which you open up through the left side, but then it lets you use either stick to choose your options. It really just doesn't make sense to me. As for vehicle construction, I don't think the steering stick should have been a thing at all. I know that sounds a little crazy at first, but I think if you're standing on a vehicle at any time, you should be able to hit a button on your controller, and Link should just attach his Pad to the vehicle and you control it that way. If you want to just hit the vehicle and get it started without manual controls, cool, you can still do that, but the annoyance of building something sweet only to have no control stick nearby is just annoying. Maybe this could have just been an upgrade that you get later on around the same time you get the auto build feature. Now when you dodge correctly, you get given the Fury Rush ability, which is cool, but this should have been expanded on way more. When you get put in the slow down bullet time speed, it displays 4 buttons on a menu, but you can only ever spam just Fury Rush. I do not see why there were not more options in this menu. I feel like there should have been other options here. For example, they could have added one single power strike, letting Link do one big, strong attack instead of multiple hits. Maybe even giving stronger, bigger weapons a big bonus for using this attack over Fury Rush. Third option could be that you could throw a weapon from your inventory with an attack bonus. For example, if you had a spear in your inventory with an explosive barrel or a rocket fused to it, you could perfect dodge, hit the throw weapon, and then quickly throw that explosive spear or rocket spear at the enemy from a distance with a damage bonus. This could also be useful for regular weapons, as it can give an automatic weapon break bonus as a quick way to effectively toss out old weapons mid-combat. And while you're unable to throw your Master Sword, I think they could have added a little extra bonus here, where Link does a Fury of Energy Beam attacks with his sword as an option for this. Now for the fourth and final option, I think during the perfect dodge window, it would have been really awesome if you had some type of combo attack that you could do with your Sage that had elemental properties. This would have really made it feel like you and your Sage squad are working as team members. There could have been a windy volley of arrows, a swift waterfall combo attack, a fiery fastball special, a lightning rod blast, or a straight up mechanical beatdown. Now while they did fill out this world a little bit more, a lot of the side quests and treasure chests you find really feel weak as rewards sometimes. Killing a mob hideout for a handful of arrows or bomb flowers just feels kinda meh and not worth it at times.
Spiky spear.
I think a good solution to this, as well as the lackluster music you have when exploring the world map, could have been solved by a simple solution of having the Pad have a jukebox. This jukebox would have songs from various Zelda games that you can play while you quest about. They could give you some base songs at the start, but have additional songs as rewards in chests or for quests, which would encourage you to do those activities a little bit more. The depths mechanic with the darkness was not fun at all, and it wasn't really fun to traverse and navigate through it. I get this is supposed to be the area where you can cut loose with vehicles and find more powerful weapons. The aesthetics, the darkness, the gloom, and just following the way statues face gets old and annoying very fast. This is also a giant area that spans the length of the entire map, and it is all visually the same theme, which is kind of disappointing. There is a minor exception with the Fire Temple, but that's very one small location. The rewards might be great in the depths, but it really just does get annoying after a while, and after doing a lot of the ninja quests, it made me not want to play the game for a while. And honestly, getting better armor shouldn't be so inconvenient. I mean, I ended up actually never upgrading my armor at all during this game. The Great Fairies all make you want to do this music quest, which I really just couldn't be bothered with. Meanwhile, you can easily color your armor without any requirements, and I think this is just silly. You should be able to upgrade your armor at any time, regardless, and it should just be resource dependent. Now, this is a minor thing, but the dragon designs for Zelda and Ganon, while I think are pretty neat, I just wasn't feeling the design overall that much. I think their eyes are just a little too much for me, and it kind of made them look a little goofy at times. Now don't worry, we're almost done. I just have one final complaint.
Oh no! It was almost perfect!
So this is a big change, and I understand it is kind of unreasonable, but I think one of the things I would have done to improve this game is adjusting the narrative and adding some big gameplay segments. Now I know this game is already long and content rich, but hear me out. I feel like Rauru should have spoken to Link way more during the story, just like he did on Trial Island. I also think that when you approach the zones of the Rito Village or Zora's Dominion, he should have shared how things were in the past and how Rauru, Sonia, and Zelda all worked together to fix the problems, and during these segments that you would have actually played as Zelda, Rauru, and Sonia. They mentioned how Zelda wanted to help the people of the land, but we never really see her do that. And I think the way Zelda and company would have fixed these problems is by the creation of the temples. For example, the Gorons could have
now
been
you
facing a
show
food
up.
issue, and
Okay,
Zelda and
$11
company find the
short.
mine below with a rock food source. This gives you an idea as Link in the present where you need to go for the Gorons to fix up the issue they're facing in the future. The same thing could be done with the Ritos to control the weather, the Zora's water not being pure enough, so then needing the Great Fish Islands to purify everything, and the sands in the desert being true and ruly, so a temple was built to control the storms. These segments could have also allowed you to meet and given character development to the sages of the past, making it feel more like a passing of the torch to the new generation. That said, I understand how this could have broken the pace of a game a little bit and added many hours onto an already long and content-rich game. Who knows though, Zelda romping around in the past with Rauru may be the plot of a Hyrule Warriors 2 type game or something. Whew. Alright, the negativity should be over now. Let's get back on the track of positivity.
Spank that booty, spank that booty.
The freedom you get from vehicles is pretty insane. This wild freedom allows you to travel and manipulate the environment in some really cool and fun ways. Just poking around online and seeing all the crazy creations people have crafted is both exciting and hilarious. There's also so much content in this game and things to do.
Oh,
Yeah, the rewards can feel kind of weak, but the action itself is still pretty fun, and I can easily see myself
photogenic.
jumping on and off stream occasionally just to do side quests or explore some piece.
yeah, that's better.
Also, while I was upset that the shrines are all themed kind of the same, the puzzles are pretty short and fun, and they kind of make you think sometimes, although I wouldn't say any of them were terribly difficult.
Gonna be honest, this one's got me a little stumped.
But the variations of ways to solve them are always fun and amusing.
I am no longer stumped. Okay. When in doubt, bomb it out. It's the American way.
I also like the characters of the sages and thought the voice acting was all pretty well done. Also, each dungeon having its own theme again just felt amazing. And overall, I think the story was pretty well done too. It does feel weird to me, however, that Pyrrha was not a sage of some kind. I feel like she was a little bit sidelined in this game. Maybe it's just because I had not done any side quests that involved her.
Zelda on your thing too?
That said, I think Minoru is the best standout sage. I can remember before starting her temple, I stumbled into the controls menu and was wondering why I still had question marks.
Special controls. I've got a question mark under controls still? What? What could possibly... That's very strange to me.
Only for us to learn that Minoru's body is actually a mech and you can customize it.
Tiniest legs. Squats for thee, but not for me.
The customization is somewhat limited as you can't attach anything fused, but it was still super fun and super cool to just attach random things to her and give it a try. And I know the game franchise is kind of dead, but Minoru for arms too, let's go.
Throwing rocks at me.
Also, the fact you had your little sage squad running around, I thought was super fun. And then you could just roll up to bad guys as a squad and just give them a beatdown. And these guys are actually helpful in combat, even at times taking hits for you. I thought it was just fun how you could roll up and, as a team, just give the mob a bully beatdown.
Spank the baby.
And in the final battles with Ganondorf, I thought they were really awesome. Sure, the gloom stuff kind of detracts a little bit, but it was cool going one-on-one with him, and the fact that he can do the same slowdown bullet time dodge as you is pretty cool. I also think the dragon fight at the end was a really cool set piece. Usually when you fight Beast Ganon, it's very dark and gloomy and just feels super heavy. Dragon fight, however, turns that around a bit as it takes to the bright skies. I think this shows that while the dragons have lost their minds, they still have their desires. Ganondorf is still trying to destroy Link and plunge the world into darkness, and Zelda is still trying to protect and aid Link the best she can, as no matter how many times you fall off, she will always catch you. While I do think this final battle is really good, it is a little bit slow-paced, and I really do wish you had the Sage of Wind there to help you. His gust would have been super useful. Also, the song during this fight is pretty amazing. It's bright and uplifting, while also focusing on various themes of the franchise, including the dark themes from Ganondorf that we all know and recognize. I do feel like this game is truly a great improvement on the already great Breath of the Wild, but that said, I do feel like there could have been a few more improvements to really empower it and make it a little bit better, such as better menus and having no weapon degradation. Overall though, none of these really broke the game or made it terrible, they just didn't really help the score at all. I think overall I'm going to settle on giving this game a 9.3. For anything to get above a 9 for me personally, it has to be something truly innovative while also being very good. And I think the way you traverse and build things and interact with the environment and go seamlessly from sky to land of the depths makes it fall into this category. Now while I love the lore and story development of this game, the depths to me just really didn't feel that great, and I do feel like the game lulls a little bit in the middle where you're wandering around going dungeon to dungeon. The question I'm wondering though is what are they going to do next? Subscribe to this channel, bring back Link and Zelda on the same map, or are they going to explore more with the Zonai? Maybe they're going to try to tie some of this into the Twilight Realm? Let me know in the comments below what you think. It's always amazing to me when you see a game that gets super hyped up and it's actually
yeah.
able to live up to those expectations. This can even be hard to do with a sequel, but they managed to do a good job with it, so hey, well done.
Don't fall for it. Don't fall for the dancing. It's a trap.